So the establishment says that in places where Trump did well, the way to win is to go to the right in an election. Well, we just had an election in those areas. So now, was that right? Was the establishment correct in saying that, hey, man, look, if you want to win those places, you've got to start being more right-wing, and you can't be too far to the left. You've got to be either right-wing or centrist if you want to be a Democrat in those areas. Well, okay. Well, did that work? Well, let's go to a couple of races and find out. Now, first, let's go to North Dakota, right, where Heidi Heitkamp ran as a Democrat. Now, did she go to the right? Well, yes. She actually ran ads talking about how she was proud to vote with Trump some of the time. Now, you're going to see a theme here among all these Democrats. They're the ones that say, look, hey, I'm a moderate Democrat. Sometimes I vote with the Democrats. Sometimes I vote for the Republicans. I'm a moderate, and I'm not beholden to the party line. Now, that sounds good in theory. Sometimes, I guess. But in reality, it just basically means whatever horrible economic thing that Trump and the Republicans or deregulation, I'm going to vote in favor of it. That's usually what that means. Now, Heitkamp, in her ad, she said, I'm Heidi Heitkamp, and when I ran for Senate 6 years ago, I said I wouldn't vote the party line because I don't think either party has all the right answers. That's why I voted half the time with President Trump. Now, if you're a Democrat trying to win, that's generally not a great idea. But she's not appealing to progressives. She's appealing to moderate Republicans. These are the suburban Republicans that Democrats, for some reason, think are fantastic, to go after, right? In fact, Heitkamp had basically, according to an article, I think in Vox, she staked her future on the belief that North Dakotans wanted a tough, deal-making moderate, not a rubber stamp. She also said, I think it's the easiest thing in the world to pick a team and run to that side and jump up and down and say, look at me. The hardest thing in the world is to try to figure out how you can bridge the differences. Well, right now, we are talking about an election where, on one side, you have corporate Democrats that basically vote with the banks, in favor of banks and big corporations most of the time. And the other side, that's running white supremacists like Steve King. She wants to build bridges. Well, how did that work out? Well, apparently not very well, as she lost big time to Kevin Cramer. Now, look, it's not just entirely the fact that she went to the right. Yes, I think that's a big deal because she didn't excite progressives. She didn't excite what was supposed to be her base. But she doesn't consider progressives her base. She actually considers moderate Republicans to be her base. And that's who she reached out to, and she got crushed. But there was also other things, of course. There was photo ID laws, Native Americans, of course, that were disenfranchised. But then again, would she be able to get the Native American vote since she didn't exactly stand up for Standing Rock? So that's Heitkamp. So now let's go to Indiana with Joe Donnelly. So Joe Donnelly is another one of those moderate Democrats who think, no, I need to reach out across the aisle and I need to work with Republicans. I'm not going to agree with what the Democratic Party says, and I'm not always going to agree with the Republicans. I'm going to reach out. I'm going to do bipartisanship. Now, Donnelly, by the way, wanted to, not to give away too much, he wanted to fund ICE and build Trump's border wall. Now, I want to show you this ad, which may be one of the worst ads I have ever seen from a Democrat. Take a look.
Socialists want to turn health care over to the government.
Over my dead body.
Some in Congress want to let insurance companies deny coverage for pre-existing conditions.
Not on my watch.
The radical left wants to eliminate ICE.
I support ICE in funding President Trump's border wall.
Extremes on the left and right want to cut defense spending.
I don't want our troops in a fair fight. I want them to have the best. As President Reagan said, peace through strength. I'm Joe Donnelly. I approve this message.
Ronald frickin' Reagan. That's a Democrat ad. Now, I would think that that's actually a moderate Republican ad. Like, oh, I'm not like the right, I'm not like the left. Because look at the left. I mean, those radical socialists want to create socialized medicine, which works in every other country that they've ever tried it. But it's not going to work here because I don't want it. See how moderate I am? Again, one side is white supremacists and neo-Nazis. That's the side that they go for. And rich people. And the other side is, you know, corporate Democrats, basically. And Joe Donnelly's like, no, I got to find the middle of that. That is what we call radical centrism. And so what happened to Donnelly? Donnelly got crushed. Moving on, let's go to Claire McCaskill, right? Now, Claire McCaskill, she was in Missouri. So now, interesting thing about her, she won in 2006. She barely won re-election in 2012, where she was lucky enough to face off against Todd Akin. Now, Todd Akin is known as the legitimate rape guy. So that was like a gift from heaven, man. Like, oh yeah, oh, you're going to talk about how there is legitimate rape? Oh, please continue, Todd Akin. She barely also won in that election, but, well, she didn't win this time. And I'm going to show you an example why. Now, according to the New York Times, Ms. McCaskill turned heads in the campaign's closing days by backing Mr. Trump's polarizing approach to the caravan of asylum seekers marching toward the southern border and releasing a radio ad that described her as, quote, not one of those crazy Democrats. Crazy Democrats. Now, you realize, McCaskill, you're a Democrat, right? And you're trying to excite your base by, excite your base to get them out to the polls. But you're saying, I'm not one of the crazy Democrats. Vote for me. Why would anybody want to vote for you? And besides, before we get to that, let's get into what she thinks a crazy Democrat actually is. And I'm going to go to her talking about that on Fox News. Let's take a look.
Who's the crazy Democrat?
The crazy Democrats are people who walk in restaurants and scream in elected officials' faces. The crazy Democrats are, we have a state senator here in Missouri that actually advocated for the assassination of President Trump. That's a crazy Democrat. I don't do those things. I am not somebody who thinks that we should ever be uncivil. I think what most Missourians want is for us to listen to each other, figure out where we can compromise, not scream in each other's faces, not call each other names. So I'm really talking about civility here. I'm talking about being polite, having good manners.
Well, just to be clear, there's not another crazy Democrat in the Senate.
Well, I would say this. I would not call my colleagues crazy, but Elizabeth Warren sure went after me when I advocated tooling back some of the regulations for small banks and credit unions. I certainly disagree with Bernie Sanders on a bunch of stuff.
I disagree with Bernie Sanders on a bunch of stuff. Who, Bernie Sanders, by the way, well, I wouldn't call him crazy, but I disagree with him a lot. He's the most popular politician in the country. Elizabeth Warren is also not far behind. Oh, but, you know, crazy Democrats, right? The people who yell at people, at elected officials in a restaurant. Claire, are you worried about somebody yelling at you in a restaurant? Well, I guess you don't have to worry about it anymore because you got crushed. You lost. But I love the false equivalence here, right? So, for example, somebody interrupting Mitch McConnell at dinner and being too loud. Well, that makes you a crazy Democrat, right? But allying with white supremacists, which is what they do on the other side, if they are not already white supremacists, that's okay. I'm not going to call that out. Why? It's because the voters that I'm trying to court people on the right instead of progressives, well, I mean, I'd rather go and court those people. Right now, again, I keep hammering this point home. We've got right-wing terrorists out there killing people in the streets. But don't yell at Mitch McConnell. That is uncivil. Terribly uncivil. That's Claire McCaskill for you. These Democrats, McCaskill, Donnelly, and Heitkamp, lost. They lost because they were not progressive. They lost because they shit on progressives. But there's more. Finally, the most disheartening losses of yesterday were Andrew Gillum and Beto O'Rourke, and there is a reason for that. Now, Gillum was running in Florida against an incredibly, deeply racist candidate, Ron DeSantis. This is the guy who released an ad saying that, hey, if you vote for the black guy, then you're going to monkey it up. Don't let him monkey up Florida. Deeply racist ad, and deeply racist candidate. Still, Gillum did not win. And here's the thing. I had a lot of hope for Gillum. In the primary, he had so much energy, and he was running on such a progressive platform, but he made the fatal mistake. As soon as he went to the general, he listened to the Democratic consultants and made a pivot. He stopped talking about Medicare for all. He stopped saying Medicare for all, and he started saying, well, I'm for affordable health insurance. I think that right there, that pivot, that change, killed his chances. Now, another thing that was mentioned that I noticed is that he had campaigned with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton is one of the most unpopular people in electoral politics today. She is deeply unpopular. She is more unpopular than Donald Trump. Why would you not want, why would you want someone like that campaigning for you? I'll never understand. So obviously these people were very deeply unpopular with progressives, the same progressives that carried Gillum through the primary process. So there were a lot of people, understandably, very, very angry about that. And so he made that pivot. He listened to the consultants, and it cost him. It cost him dearly. And it cost the residents of Florida deeply. But, of course, unfortunately, that's what a lot of these Democrats do. They end up pivoting. And when they pivot, it basically tells people that, oh, what I believed in the primary, I don't actually believe it. And so there's no trust there, right? And so when there's no trust, you depress the turnout. Now, losing Florida is pretty terrible. They're very important for 2020, of course. And speaking of losing Florida, we also have Bill Nelson. Now, Bill Nelson ran against Rick Scott. Now, Rick Scott is deeply unpopular in Florida. And he's also basically somebody who scammed the state out of millions of dollars. He did the largest Medicare fraud in history, in Florida history. Nonetheless, Rick Scott might actually beat Bill Nelson. Now, what's interesting is it's actually gotten close enough to where there is a recount, which is amazing in itself because Bill Nelson should have put away Rick Scott. As boring as Bill Nelson is, and by the way, he's about as exciting as a piece of driftwood, he should have at least beaten the deeply unpopular Rick Scott. And maybe he will, but it should have been a lot more than what it could be, which could be, 1 point. So it is deeply disappointing to see what has happened in Florida. And what's interesting is that there's a good thing in Florida. One of the biggest progressive ballot measures, giving people, millions of people, their right to vote back, won. But yet, you've got progressive policy in ballot proposals winning, but you don't have Democrats winning, and that is a huge, terrible disconnect. But anyway, And look, you can also point out that maybe it's not Gillum's fault 100%, as there is voter suppression, of course, in Florida, right? Voter suppression, problems with voting machines, etc. And you can look to what happened with Beto O'Rourke and the Texas voting machines. You can also look what's happening in Georgia, between Brian Kemp, who is deeply corrupt, and his position controlling the elections is very problematic, and Stacey Abrams. Nonetheless, even with those issues, this election should not have been close. Gillum ran progressive. He should have stayed progressive, and the progressive base would have carried him through. Because when you think about it, you can't tack to the right, you can't tack to the center and expect people who are racist to support you. And that was a big issue in the Gillum race. But progressives, again, put your faith in progressives and support progressives, and progressives will support you. But now, speaking of progressives, I have to be very fair here and talk about two progressive losses. I've been trashing corporate Democrats for this entire segment, so I'm going to be fair and I'm going to own up. Now, we had two losses, Randy Bryce and Richard Ojeda. Now, Ojeda, very strong campaigner in West Virginia. Now, this man made up a 40-point gap, but he wasn't able to close it completely and take away the win. Now, Ojeda, of course, wasn't quite as progressive on some of the policies, but he was very strong about it, what he believed in, and he was unapologetic. So, nonetheless, he didn't win. Not every place where you run as someone who is more progressive do you always win. And that happens, for example, Wisconsin. Now, Randy Bryce, Iron Stash, he also did not win. Now, Randy Bryce is a great example of somebody who did nothing wrong, ran a strong progressive campaign, but in the end was unable to pull it out. Now, there's no excuses on that one, right? Now, he did chase out Paul Ryan, and that's great. But at the same time, he did get beaten by someone who was basically a clone of Paul Ryan. So, nonetheless, sometimes a good progressive can do all the right things and still lose. Victory is never guaranteed. But that doesn't mean that progressives can't win. And to balance this out, there were great progressive victories. Dana Nessel in Michigan for Attorney General. Deeply, deeply progressive. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York's 14. Those are just a couple of examples of some good wins. And in fact, there was a lot of women of color who won last night as well. And there's a possibility that Stacey Abrams in Georgia can win as well. So there is that possibility. Now, as for the centrists, the centrist Democrats, we were unfortunately correct. They went to the right, they got clobbered. So maybe the next time, in some of these other races, we should try going left and see what happens. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.